All right. Good. I was going to say good morning, but I guess you could really be listening to this whenever you want. It's not morning right now when we're recording, but welcome to the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast. So I don't know why I was inclined to say good morning there. It's 3 in the afternoon.
Well, to be fair, we typically record in the morning.
We do.
So I think that's just probably
Yeah.
behind the secrets. It's about like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yes, exactly. So this is the February episode, and we have a guest here that's going to be joining us very shortly, Jamie Johnson. Some of you may or may not know him, but we're looking forward to that. But before we bring him in here, I just wanted to give a announcement and a plug really quickly. At the end of this year in December, after Christmas, so I know it's very far away from now, but there is a Evangelical Friends conference called Friends Summit, which is geared towards like older high school and college aged students. And it is it's national. I guess there are some people who are there that may be from international, but it's mainly a national Evangelical Friends conference. So people from, Southwest Yearly Meeting, Mid-America Yearly Meeting, Ohio, all these kind of places come together. And they do it once every 4 years. So it's happened 3 times up until this point, once in 2010, once in 2014, once in 2018. And then technically the next one would have been in December of 2022, but with COVID and everything, they pushed it back 1 year. So the fourth Friends Summit will be in December 2023, and you can go to www.friendsummit.com. They have all the information on there. It's going to be in Houston, Texas, staying at a hotel, and there will be speakers and workshops from different people across. There will be people from Northwest Yearly Meeting who are leading some workshops and classes and worship, but there'll also be people, as I mentioned, from Mid-America or Ohio, which is Eastern region, and Alaska Yearly Meeting, Southwest, which is like California and Nevada. So it's really interesting. You get to meet people from other yearly meetings and hear from other people from other yearly meetings. And it's really like one of the only, if not the only, like national friends gathering that happens. So whether you are a young adult yourself, if you're in that age range of like 17 to 25, like consider attending it as an attendee. But if you're a little older and you're like, man, that sounds cool. One thing that they like to do is to have like every young adult that comes like have a sponsor or a mentor from their local church. So if you're listening to this and you're like 40 years old and you're like, dang, I want to go to that. Well, maybe then you can be that mentor person. You can find a young adult from your church and say, hey, I heard about this. Would you want to go to this with me? And then you guys make the trip and travel together and have that time. Oh, go
Now,
ahead.
Jacob, you're a youth pastor, correct?
Yes.
Now, have you ever been?
I have been. I went as an attendee in 2010, all the way back then. That one was in the Denver or the Colorado Springs area. I was a young adult at that point. And then I went last time they had it in 2018 as the youth pastor, and we took 4 youth and young adults from our church, and it was a good time. So I've been to 2 out of the 3. I would encourage it. It's a great time.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, a little more behind the scenes thing. I am helping somewhat plan it, so I do have some vested interest, I guess, there. But
full disclosure
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it says something that you attended and are a part of it, and you're excited about it. So
For sure. Yeah. Well, if that's all we got here, I'm going to bring our guest in here, and we can get started talking with Jamie Johnson, who I know, and I don't think Austin does.
I met him once.
So we'll get some introductions here. I have kind of an interesting connection to Jamie.
Hey guys.
Hey, there he is. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
Thanks for joining us here.
Of course.
Taking time out of your busy day. So you're at George Fox. Have classes resumed yet for the?
No, they start on Monday, the 9th.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just get right into it here. I've got, we sent you some questions. We got some questions we want to chat with. I was just saying, I know you kind of, and Austin said he's met you once, maybe at yearly meeting this last year. So, I guess the first question is, would you just describe yourself, who you are, what your role is within Northwest Yearly Meeting, things like that?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Jamie Johnson. I grew up in the Northwest Yearly Meeting. Actually, my family moved here when I was 5 years old, and we started attending Newburgh Friends at that point. And I did all of my growing up in Newburgh through high school, went to George Fox, and then left for a little while to do graduate school and some other things, and then came back in 2009. And I am a recorded minister in the Northwest Yearly Meeting. I serve here at George Fox as Dean for Spiritual Life and University Pastor. And I am married to Erin. We have 3 kids who are all teenagers, 18, 16, and almost 14 years old. And yeah, I think my story is deeply intertwined with the yearly meeting, with George Fox, with folks who are serving in lots of different ways throughout the yearly meeting, particularly in the Northwest.
Yeah, I was just saying too, I was like, my quote unquote connection to you, I guess, is that your uncle, David, is the pastor at the church that I grew up in Friendswood, Texas. So like when I was in 4th grade is when they moved down there. I guess I don't know if I know he spent some time in the Northwest a little bit, but I don't know if that's where he directly came from prior to that. I know he was also in Indiana a little bit. But yeah. So I was actually just down there for Christmas. Went to Christmas Eve service there. So I saw David and Rochelle and all of them.
Yeah. We have ties in Mid-America as well. My dad grew up in Haviland. My grandpa taught at what was Friends Bible College, now is Barkley. That's where my mom and dad met, at Friends Bible College. And yeah, my uncle and others in my dad's family are connected to various Friends churches throughout Mid-America, mostly in Kansas, but David and Rochelle in Houston.
So you've got the Friends connection.
I do. I'm a 3rd generation Friend. Both my grandparents on both sides, my mom and my dad. My grandparents on my mom's side were heavily involved in Greenleaf Friends Church, the academy there. And so if you talk about like the three like educational institutions that are basically educate every lifelong Quaker, at least many of them, Barkley, Greenleaf Academy, and George Fox University. I've got connections to all 3 of
them. Dang. So you mentioned that you're a recorded pastor in Northwest Yearly Meeting, which you just like officially got recorded this past summer at the annual sessions. So I just was wondering if you could give a little input on what that process is like. I mean, I know I'm not recorded. I don't know if Austin, if you are. So I vaguely know what the process entails a little bit here, but what was that like for you? And I guess what maybe led you to do that?
Yeah, actually, it was a really long process for me. Part of it, actually, the main reason for it was because for a while they suspended recordings while things were happening within the yearly meeting. They just didn't do any. So I had started the process before that, and then during those, I think what was about maybe 2 years, maybe 3. I'm not entirely sure on the length of that time. Nothing was happening, and so I was basically just put on hold, as were some other folks. And the process has changed. So the process that I started with is different than the one that is used now. So I'll talk about what mine was like, but I think anyone who would start it now would experience something a little bit differently. For me, it was a really good opportunity to have people both walk alongside of me, encourage me, provide things for me to, there's like a reading list that I had to do. There were conversations, mentoring relationships that were a part of that. Some theological reflection, kind of essay questions, maybe. They weren't quite essay length, but certainly having to address different theological topics to ensure alignment with the yearly meeting. And then towards the end of it, there's a psychological evaluation that all people going through recording do with an independent psychologist. And I think it typically takes about 2 to 3 years, but mine, because of the hiatus in the middle of it, I think mine took 6 years, maybe. In fact, I had almost given up, like that anything would happen, mostly because I thought I would just have to start all over again with a new process, and I wasn't sure how much time or energy I had for all of that. But it ended up that all of the things that I had done before were counted towards the requirements that need to be done, and after they got moving again with the recording process, it was a pretty quick thing. And I think it was valuable. Like, there were things I learned about myself, the psychological evaluation, the conversations you have. There's some like tests that you have to take as well, that provide good, in essence, are like a mirror that gets held up to you to understand more of who you are and why you do the things that you do. And so that was all really helpful. Getting to think through theological issues, to talk with people about them, can be like a little challenging, but also is good to continue to think about, why do I believe, what do I believe, those kinds of things. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't feels like they have a calling into ministry to at least kick the tires on it, because it is something that is really valuable, and it provides a credential at the end, but that's not the main reason for doing it. The main reason for doing it is that self-knowledge, that the sense of like the calling that you've experienced is one that other people can affirm, and it gives, certainly some confidence, but I think more importantly, it just provides a broader community of people who care about you, who are invested in you, and that's a good thing.
That kind of leads me to kind of just a follow-up question of recording as a process of, discerning your calling in a sense, just kind of to kind of thresh out what you're discerning and in community. And just kind of a follow-up question to you is like, what during that process did you discern your calling to be in ministry, and specifically?
Yeah, I think when I first started the process, again, years and years ago, I actually didn't feel a calling into pastoral ministry. I had felt a calling for a long time into working in a Christian college context. I went and did seminary. I did a PhD. I had intended to be a professor, and step into that line of ministry. But every time there was an opportunity for furthering that journey, we just didn't feel released to be able to do it. And so when I was at a crossroads a bit, trying to discern, like you had mentioned, what was next. And I did the good old Quaker thing. I convened a clearness committee. I pulled together some folks who knew me, who cared about me, and it was actually at Ron Stansel's house, and with him and a few others, we sat around his living room, and they asked me questions. I shared, and then we listened together. And at the end of that, there was a sense of being called into ministry. Mostly, actually, the first real leading was a leading to not pursue a faculty role. So it was more of like a way closing than it was necessarily a way opening. And so that was really helpful. And then it just turned out that, like, I was already working at George Fox, and it just turned out I wasn't working in pastoral ministry. Our office is called Spiritual Life, right? I wasn't working in the Spiritual Life office at that point. I was directing the Friends leadership program, and I was enjoying it. But I was also not sure what was going to be next. But I felt from that clearness committee a sense of like, just keep doing the thing that's right in front of you. And that turned into being able to step into actual pastoral ministry in the George Fox context. So I've never had this like clarion call of like, you're going to be a pastor. It's mostly been just trying to be faithful to like the opportunity that is right there in front of me, whatever that might be. And instead of like chasing something, like being faithful to trust that God's at work in the immediate thing, and also God's at work in whatever is going to be in the future. But I can't dictate what the future holds. Only God can.
Yeah, well, going into that, I'm just kind of curious, like what does it mean to be the university pastor at George Fox? Like, you mentioned not feeling a call towards pastoral ministry specifically, and I don't know, like one thing that stood out to me during that, watching the people in the recording process last summer, I think there was 4 of you who were being like recorded. 3 of them were just like what you would expect, like pastors of a local church that, is going to preach on Sunday and do all that kind of stuff. So you were kind of the standout one to me, because I was, you're saying like, I'm not the pastor of a church, but
Yeah.
I'm getting recorded. So I'm just kind of curious what that role of university of pastor at George Fox University looks like.
Yeah, I think at one point at yearly meeting last year, somebody joked that I was a pastor of the largest church in the yearly meeting.
Yeah.
Which
for sure. I think I heard someone say that you definitely have the largest like youth and young adult congregation, which
yes,
that is for sure.
Yeah. My congregation is made up of 18 to 21-year-olds entirely. No, I think we talk about ministry in a college context of ministering to a parade in some ways. Like we have them for 4 years, some of them for a little bit less, some for a little bit more, but for the most part they're here for those 4 years. They come here for an education, obviously, but they're also choosing to most of them are choosing to come here because it's a Christian university. And part of that entails they are required to go to chapel. So when this past summer, when somebody joked about the largest I'm like, it's also the only one in which people are required to go to it, which creates interesting dynamics, certainly. But there's something about working with 18 to 21-year-olds, that phase of life where they're very interested in exploring who God is. They're learning about themselves. They're also like very stressed. Like there's projects and papers and homework and relationships and existential dread for whatever is after college. Are they going to be able to pay off their loans? Like all those kinds of things, like rolled into this almost like residential ministry opportunity, where we're with our we're with our congregants for a week at a time. We see them on the sidewalks, we're eating lunch with them, we're gathering with them for worship a couple of times a week. So it's like a really sweet time of ministry, but also it's hard because I think 18 to 21-year-olds, especially today, and this is a good thing, although they're still learning how to like exercise it, but like they're very opinionated. They think they know what they like. If it's not entertaining is not the word I want to use, but if it's not keeping their attention and they're quick to move on to something else, they'll wait till the end to make decisions because they want to figure out what all of their options are, those kinds of things. And so there is a sense of, they're not in it to like placate. They're not in it to, try to curry favor. They really truly are just like, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm going through. Some of them like really want to wrestle with it and talk. Others are just, bent on, finishing their degree. And the gift is that like, no matter where they're at, like we get them in our chapel services, we get them in our life groups, we get them in one-on-one conversations. And in different ways and get to spend time with them over the course of 9 months. The other thing that's a little bit different about college ministry versus a church ministry is like we get a sabbatical every year. Like they go home in the summer for 3 months. We get to rest, recover, study, pray, like think about, assess all the things that happened the past year and prepare and plan for the next year. And that really truly is, I think, for us a gift, that break that is just part of the rhythm that allows us to like restore our own souls, to find where we're depleted, think about the work that we're doing, that and listen for what God is up to. But it also allows the students to like, I think being in college can just feel a bit like a pressure cooker. So it gives them an opportunity to like step out of that. And for them also to like reflect, how has God been at work? What about this past year was really hard, and why? Like, where can I see God in the hard things? Where can I see God in what was good? And do I even believe in God? I mean, those kinds of things that come with being this age, going through hard things and thinking about what the future holds. So
now, how long have you been a university like pastor?
Yeah,
in this kind
I
of
think
role?
technically 10 or I think 10 years. It's a little murky because I came to Fox as the director of the Friends Leadership Program. And then I sort of like slowly was invited into ministry work, even though I wasn't officially on the pastoral team here, I think until like 2012 or 13, maybe. So it's been like, I've been here 14 years. It's been 9 or 10 as an official university pastor.
Now, have you seen any like, changes over in that time of, the spiritual challenges, or just like the climate? Has it shifted for you at all? Has there been any differences? And if you have seen a difference, like what are they?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's some cultural differences that come into play. Like we now have every class except for the seniors. Is that true? Yeah, I think have had their education. No, even the seniors now, like everyone that we're interacting with in some ways had their education interrupted by COVID in a pretty significant way, right? So there's a piece of what they're experiencing now, like I think the hard parts of that, but also the things they learned about themselves, the resiliency as it came through that. There's more opportunity for them. It feels like to time investment like is different now than it used to be. I think like there were just less, I would say were less opportunity, even 10 years ago, less opportunities for students to spend, ways for them to spend their time than there is now. Part of that has to do with like there's an increased need to work as many hours as possible because college has gotten so much more expensive, and so they're filling the cracks of their time with jobs, whereas even 10 years ago, and especially when I was a student, like it was very rare when I was a student, this 20 years ago, to work any more than like 5, maybe 10 hours a week, maybe that's it. And it was very, it wasn't very common for that to be the majority experience. But now if a student is working only 10 hours a week, you're like, wow, okay, that's different. Like many of them are working 15, 20, 30. There's students working full-time, doing full-time classes, and that's the only way that they can afford college. And so I think that's been a part of it. Like there's also more pressure that students today face to get a degree that's going to translate to making money once they graduate. And some of it has to do with the cost of college, but some of it has to do with, I think, pressures that they feel based on the economy or that their parents are putting on them. That's a little bit different. And so, we've had an increase in students doing like professional, whether it's engineering, nursing, business, versus the humanities like English and history and even like Christian ministry, those kinds of things. Many fewer students doing that route. But I think like generally speaking, like someone who's 18, 19, 20 years old, like even when I think back to my own experience, like the things that I was wrestling with, they're still the same things. Like the outworking of them is a little bit different. I didn't have constantly in front of me other people's, at least what other people were saying their life looked like. I didn't have that. Like I knew the people who were my roommates, and I knew the people who were on my floor. Like I knew what their lives looked like, but that constant barrage of people through social media that creates oftentimes like unhealthy perceptions of our own selves. I didn't have that. 10 years ago, students didn't have that. And I think, at least particular to this time compared to maybe 10 years ago, there just is, even with college students, a stronger polarization between groups of students, whether it's political, sometimes it's theological. It's not as much theological now. It's more politically motivated now. But I sense that more now than 10 years ago, where there certainly were students who would be like, yeah, I resonate more with this political party or that political party, but it's not so important to me that I'm going to like sever relationships or those kinds of things that happens now. Like feels like there's much more splintering, in group connections happening than seeking to understand, across whatever spectrum you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case across the board, but like you kind of alluded to it or hinted at it earlier, is like that age group was maybe a lot more vocal and strongly opinionated one way or the other. So yeah,
and I think with college students like this, and I experienced this as a college student myself, like you just think so much.
Yeah.
And you're learning a lot. And as you're learning a lot, you're like, wow, look at all these things that I'm learning. I feel like I know so much. And you're really confident in those things. And then you like step into whatever, life looks like after college. You're like, oh, there's a lot of things I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things I'm unsure about. Like, how do you develop relationships when you're not like living with, 1,500, 2,000 other people your age? Like, how do you find a church when you're not just showing up to chapel, once or twice a week? How do you pay bills when your parents have been doing that for you, most often? So those kinds of things where these years you feel like a lot. And I think it's developmentally appropriate to like develop that confidence. Like, look, I am going to be ready to go out into the world to use these skills that I have, but it creates this sort of false, sense of confidence where it's like, you don't actually know as much as you think you do. And you probably shouldn't be as confident as you think you are. But you can't say that to someone because it comes across yourself being arrogant and like, well, you think but you don't. I really know. Instead of like, we're all together on this journey of like learning who God is and trying to see how God's at work, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to have hopefully some great moments of really connecting what we do, how we live, with how God is at work. And we're just we're our strongest when we realize that we need each other, instead of trying to convince everyone that we're all right and we don't need anyone.
Yeah, it's just kind of weird for me. Like, I'm 10 years now removed from being in college. I don't know about Austin. I'm guessing probably around the same.
It's 10.
But like, just some of these conversations and some of these things that you're saying, I'm like, wow, I can remember like being back in that moment. And even something you just said, like, when you leave college, how do you make friends? Like, I remember being in that situation. Like, you're in college, you kind of know in the dorm room and in the dorms, like, at any given moment, you could go down to this room and they'll be, so-and-so will be here, or you could go down to the common area and hang out, and then you graduate and you move away. And that feeling of loneliness, I was like, man, I haven't thought about that specific thing in like such a long time, but yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. So 2 more questions here. And one we may have already just touched on a little bit, but like, as you're interacting with college age students a lot, and you mentioned you even have a college age student in your home, or I guess he's not in your home technically now, he's at college, but what are some positives that you see with that age group, with that generation, in regards like specifically to their faith and their relationship with the church?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound weird saying it, but I think one of the positives is like they won't put up with things that feel fake, and they're looking for things that are real. And real means like it's not always hunky dory. It's not always good stuff. Like things in life are hard, and if they are connecting with a faith community that makes everything seem like everything's good, like if everything's not good, then you're just not trusting enough. Then they're quickly going to be like, yeah, you guys, this isn't the place for me, because they've gone through, I mean, we all have, but like think about going through what this generation has gone through when we were 16, 15, 17. Like it would have been massive, and it would have formed us in really really incredible ways. And so I think that's a gift that they bring to the faith community of and again, it feels weird saying it's a gift, but like knowing when things feel fake, like I think that's a gift. And being able to say like, no, this doesn't feel real. I'm not going to just go through the motions. Like I'm looking for things that actually reflect what life is like and the challenges to go with it. I think they care. They do care about. They care about the Sunday worship experiencing, connecting to all aspects of life. That it's not just about a Sunday morning experience of faith, but like the extension of that through relationships, through the ways that we talk to each other, through the ways that we live in the world, which I think is an important thing they bring. And then also I think like they're, for the most part, like they're not afraid to express doubts that they have, and to say like, I mean, if you look at the research, like there's a large percentage in this generation and the younger generation, people who say they don't have faith or they're not religious, like, but they're super interested in spirituality. They're interested in like connection with God. And I think that desire to like connect with God is something that they have, and something that they seek out, and also something that they're not finding very easily. And I think when the church says to these young people, like, we really want you here, but we don't really care about what you have to say, or your insight or things like that, like in essence, like earn your place, earn your keep. Like when you're older, then you'll be able to have things to offer to us, but says to them like, who you are and where you're at right now, like we want to hear those things. We want to give you an opportunity to get plugged in to different places, even though you may have moments where you're like, I'm not quite sure about this faith thing, or you're struggling on your journey. And so I think all of those things are, I would say I've encountered with students, but also like there is this really sweet desire to worship, to be connected with one another. And I think a year and a half, 2 years of isolation in different ways is like made that even stronger. We we just have really, we've seen students who are just eager. They're eager to worship. They're eager to gather, to be together, and that feels really beautiful.
Yeah, I noticed that last point a lot with young people that I interact with. Some of them are a little bit younger than college age, but like all the online stuff, all the Zoom stuff, all that was happening during 2020 and 2021. Some of it has continued on for certain things just out of convenience or whatever, but I've noticed a real disdain to it from younger people, whereas like maybe some older people are still like, yeah, I'll get on a Zoom call, or I'll do this. Young people are just like, I want nothing to do with that. Like I'll either meet you and do this in person, or that's it, like they want the actual connection. They're so over the online stuff, which could seem like, at face value, that kind of seems counterintuitive, because it's like, you always hear like young people are just on their phones and they're doing this, but
the digital age.
yeah, but they are. So, that's not to not say that's true. But when it comes to things like that, like doing, like I've just seen a lot of young people, like our church, for example, still does online services. And I've noticed that older people, when they're out of town, will still tune in on a Sunday. But younger people, if they're gone for whatever reason, no.
Yeah.
Well, on the flip side,
I just add one more thing to that, because one of the things that we noticed after restrictions and things were lifted was that college students, I don't know if this is just them or if there are others who've experienced it too, but like they also don't want to come back out in the evening. We used to do an evening chapel once a week that was pre-COVID, was like the favorite chapel. I mean, it would be full. People would linger afterwards. It was just like really, really meaningful. After COVID, any evening thing we do, nothing. Like very few people want to come. The pattern they got into of like, okay, you do your things, but then when you go home, you're home. And that's kind of changed a bit how we do things. Like we're trying to like nest ourselves more in their day-to-day rhythm than we are saying come out in the evening to this thing. So
interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Well, the flip side of that question is, are there any like negative things, or the way I phrased it was potential roadblocks that you see with this generation and their view, I guess, to the church or whatever? Not to have this be the bashing hour.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it, when they look at church, they don't necessarily see it as a necessity, which I think there is good to that, because they are like wrestling with what is the church even, how can, if it's not living in the world in the ways that seem to be right, then why does it even matter? But I think the flip side of it is not, there being a lack of desire to like be connected and committed to it, even with the blemishes or the things that are happening. So I think that's one thing. Like, and I would chalk it up to like, just generally speaking, they're quick to move on from things, no matter what it is, right? If something's not working, it's like, well, I'll just move on to the next thing. And I think that's true with the faith community, with churches. I think there's a lot of information that they get. I'm still amazed by how many, and it's not a ton, but there's still more than I expected, of students who are like, oh yeah, I regularly listen to this preacher online who's in, like Florida, or this preacher online who's in Texas or in, New York or whatever. Like there's a lot, and that's just like religious content. There's a lot of other content that they're consuming that means there's a lot of voices, a lot of content, and not all of it is consumed with like an eye towards whether it's right or true or not. And so I think that is, mostly like, if it looks good and it sounds good, then it's probably true, versus like there might be some other rubrics that I want to use to like measure whether this is true or not. So I think that's one thing. I think the other is like, there's a sense of, maybe this is connected, but like there are lots of things that can be true, and so you can just kind of like take the things that we like of certain things that we hear and put them all together, and it becomes this like hodgepodge of beliefs versus something that's rooted in what is historical, or what is been a part of the Christian narrative, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Once again, going back to that mindset of like where I was at that age. And one thing I used to always say, so, and I've told people this, like I went to Berkeley, we had to go to chapel twice a week. It was required, like you're mentioning. So I was a captive audience, that kind of stuff, Tuesdays and Thursdays. But like, as someone who grew up in the church and was going to the church a lot growing up, during my time there, I never attended church on Sunday morning, and my excuse or my claim or whatever was like, I go to church twice a week now. I have to go to chapel twice a week. I don't know if you still hear that these days or whatever, but and it kind of goes along with that. It's like, sure, I'm going to chapel and I'm hearing from a different speaker twice a week and all that kind of stuff, but it was kind of lacking the community aspect and the different stuff that you get at being a part of a church. It's like church is more than just listening to a pastor.
Yeah.
So I think, and I hear people say that today, even some older people. It's like, yeah, I listen to this guy online all the time, and I'm like, okay, that's good. Like, I like that guy too, but there's more to it than just listening to the 30-minute sermon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but we tell students often, like, the chapel is not church.
Yeah.
No, it's not a substitute. You need to view it more as like part of your education than part of your, this larger calling that we have to like be the body of Christ, even though it still is the body of Christ, but like we want them to connect with churches, and as such we'll like bring in local pastors often to do preaching, to connect with students, so that they're like, oh yeah, I want to go to that church. So
yeah, I do think that there is that. I mean, I went to a Christian college, but like I did see that there was a confusion between absorbing, religious content, going to a chapel service and getting kind of like an information download, and being a part of a like actual church community, or like two different things. Like church is more than just absorbing content. Right. It's about like living it out with other people who are not like you. Because like that's the other thing about church that was when I went to Multnomah, you had to like basically go to a church somewhere else. It forced you to kind of go outside your own experience and be in community with other people who are different than you. And that's always like such a, an important, I think, element of the faith community, is that like, one of the things that I thought was interesting is when I was in college, it was like I was surrounded by so many people who were like me, who are like in the same moment and like same concerns, and realizing like for the most of you, like for the most of life, that's kind of weird that you're in a community that's like pretty monolithic. Even if it feels like there's a lot of diversity on some other ways,
totally.
Well, you even joked and said like you said your congregation is exclusively 18 to 21-year-olds. So it's like, no, most churches have a wide variety of ages. So there's value and importance in having a 21-year-old interact with a 60-year-old. The 21-year-old may not always see that or understand why that is, but
flip side, the 6-year-old.
Yes.
To the 21-year-old.
Okay, so the last question I had, which we've both kind of alluded to here, Austin and I, neither of us went to George Fox. I went to Berkeley, he went to Multnomah. I've seen different articles and different, I guess, opinions on Christian college specifically. I mean, really college in general, I guess. But so, I wrote on here, it could go either way depending on where you read this, but, some articles you see say like Christian colleges are failing and dwindling. Some will say they're doing great. And I'm sure the answer is somewhere in the middle. I'm sure some are dwindling and some are doing great. So I guess one question is like, specifically, how are things at George Fox? And then beyond that, like, what would you say is the importance of Christian college, Christian education?
I think probably whenever you talk with people who are employed by a place, they'll try to paint it in a rosy picture no matter what, unless they're wanting to leave or something. By all metrics, and when you talk about like enrollment, mostly enrollment, but even when you talk about gifts, donations, construction, those kinds of things happening, like Fox is in a good place. We've had increasing enrollment. We've had programs that are growing, but there are also programs that are being cut because they just aren't attracting students. And so I think one of the things, 20 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, if a program wasn't attracting students, it didn't matter. It was like part of the educational experience. So like you would have classes in in a wide variety of subjects, but it didn't matter if you only had 2 majors in that program. Like everyone was being exposed to the broad or the breadth of education. So so I think there's good things and there's hard things. Like it feels like we're in a good space. We're building a new chapel. It's going to be a beautiful building on campus. It should be done spring of 24, I think, in which we'll be able to host many of our spiritual formation events. There are new programs being started, particularly graduate level. So it feels like it's in a healthy spot. I think there are challenges for any college right now. And, next year we could be privy to those. Like it's very volatile right now, the higher education market, for sure. But it feels like George Fox is in a pretty good space in terms of where we're at. And I think education in general, and people are asking the right questions about it. Like, is it worth it? If I am going to pay, like, what is the school going to provide to me that's going to make it worth it if I'm paying all this money? And so a Christian education provides the opportunity for formation to happen, not just in the field that you're studying, but holistically, thinking about what does it mean to be followers of Christ? What does it look like to be people who are guided by an ethic of love and of service versus an ethic of self-promotion and scarcity? And so there's a lot of value, especially in a place that is healthy, in a place that has opportunity for students to engage across many different perspectives, many different opportunities. I think it does provide a really important experience for students. And also, like, there are students who I've talked with in the past who I'm like, you know what, it's not worth it right now. Even actually my own child right now, he is in community college. And the reason for it is because he was like, I don't know what I want to do. He's like, I don't want to go to George Fox. Both my parents work there. I'm not, I want to get away for a little bit, but also like, I don't know what I want to do. And so does it make more sense to like spend a lot of money at a certain place or to spend a little bit of money? And so he's at community college right now, doing college, but also I think smartly, like, not taking on debt in order to like do things that he doesn't know what the end result's going to be.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah. I'm the oldest of 5, and my youngest sister is the only one who did that. Like all, the other 4 of us all just went straight to a college and were there and graduated. And she was the youngest one, was the one who like went to a community college for a year or 2 and got some cheaper credits and then transferred somewhere else. And now hindsight 2020, all that kind of stuff, I'm like, you were the smartest one out of all of us.
Yeah. I mean, college is important, but it's not like the end all be all either. We really love getting to walk alongside of students, but there are places where they can get that mentoring as well. The local church, other like nonprofits, organizations, places of employment that can be really helpful in terms of helping guide future steps when you're trying to figure that out. So I love it here at Fox. I love the work we get to do. I think we're in a good space, and also like everyone's story and situation is unique. And so
nice. Well, I don't have anything else. Austin, do you have anything?
I'm good.
Well, thanks for taking the time, Jamie.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Enjoy your last weekend, I guess, of time off before you get back into the swing of things here.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's programming happening this weekend, so I work a little bit, but it's all good.
There you go. You have the countdown to spring break or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
See ya.
Yeah.
Man, quite a few times during that, I was just like getting thrown back into the dorm days, like memories and things like that. It was kind of weird to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, sometimes I forget. I'm like, oh, it's been 10 years. Wow.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of the same things, it feels feel similar. And I think that's what I think something that, I don't know, as I've been just kind of like listening, just thinking about how I think sometimes we think that, each generation is so much more different, right? Like, that, every young, the new generation's like this. But I think something that is good to remember is just people are people, and that age range, like there's patterns to it that, you don't have to, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like that feeling of wanting to be authentic, or being opinionated because you think you know everything, like those, or likewise wrestling with your doubts because you realize that you don't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And like all of those things like felt so familiar to me, and being like, oh yeah, I think that's just like part of emerging into adulthood. And how I think I'm glad that Jamie was on to come talk about it, because I know that there's people in the early meeting who are really wrestling with like, how do we engage young people, and what new strategies do we use, and just realizing like there's probably not a lot of new strategies as much as it is like just doing the same old thing.
Mm.
And
Well, yeah, and it can be, and I hear this a lot from people. Like when I try to get people to volunteer to come help at youth groups, sometimes they're like, junior hires are scary, or high schoolers are scary, and I'm sure people would say the same thing about 21-year-olds. 21-year-olds are scary, but I think it's part of it is just most people, older people, probably are not interacting with 18 to 21-year-olds on a regular basis. Like Jamie, he's saying like, I'm around them all the time. They live here. I live here. I interact with this age group almost exclusively. So you get to know what they're like, and what their interests are, and what they're doing, and what the questions they're asking. Like you just said, it's kind of a universal thing that people in that age group are questioning some of these things and whatever. But I guess the further you get removed from it, you probably just kind of forget that. And then you randomly interact with a 21-year-old one day, and they say something, and you're like, that is so far off base, or that's a little weird. But you may just forget that's what it's like to be 21 years old.
yeah
Yep. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the February edition of the Northwest Yearly Meeting podcast, and we'll be looking forward to being in your feed. And like and subscribe.
Leave a review. Oh yeah. Next person who leaves a review, we should try to somehow reach out to them and give them a prize or something. So I know we haven't had any new reviews in a while, so I'll know when there's a new one. So
okay, so
if there's a new one, I mean, I guess if your username is like Big Jim 2748, I won't know who that is. But if your username is, something relatively understandable, we can try to figure out who you are. But yeah.
Well, we'll see you next month.
See ya.